This video is for lesson 6-5, day 1. The problems in this section involve adding or subtracting fractions. Now, fractions can only be added or subtracted if they have the same denominator. To add fractions with the same denominator, add the numerators and keep the denominator. The same rule would be used for subtraction. Now, question 1. The first fraction is x over 12. The second fraction is 3x over 12. The denominators are the same, both 12. The rule is to add the numerators. 1x plus 3x makes 4x. And keep the denominator, 12. Now simplify. 4 and 12 reduce. 4 divides by 4 once, and 12 divides by 4 3 times. The final answer is 1x on top and a 3 on the bottom. Question 3. This is a subtracting fractions question, and the denominators are the same. Subtract the numerators. 2 subtract 6 is negative 4. And keep the denominator, n. Number 13. This is an adding fractions question. The denominators are not the same. They're almost the same. One is x minus 5 and the other is 5 minus x. We've seen this before. If we factor out a negative, we can rewrite the 5 minus x as negative x minus 5. So instead of using the 5 minus x, we'll think of that denominator as being the negative of x minus 5. Now you have two options. Option 1, you can leave the problem as an adding problem and use the negative of x minus 5 as the least common denominator. But option number 2 is to apply the negative sign to the adding problem, changing it into a subtraction problem. So what I'm doing is I'm considering the negative sign in the denominator as being a subtraction in the center. Now I have a subtracting fractions problem. The denominators are the same. Subtract the numerators. 3 minus 2 makes 1. And keep the denominator, x minus 5. Number 19. This is subtracting fractions, so the denominators must be the same. Let's figure out the least common denominator. One fraction has a 2. The other fraction has the number 4. The least common multiple of 2 and 4 is 4. 4 is the second multiple of 2, and 4 is the first multiple of 4. Now there's a letter x common in both, and so the rule is to take the higher power of that variable. The least common denominator is going to be 4x squared. Now we need to change our fractions so that they have that denominator. The first fraction we need to multiply by 2 to create 4x squared, and also multiply the top by 2. For the second fraction, we need to multiply by x to create 4x squared, and then multiply the top by x. Now we'll rewrite the problem. The first fraction becomes 2 over the 4x squared. The second fraction becomes 5x over the 4x squared. Now subtract numerators. 2 and 5x are not like terms, so you can only write them side by side as a binomial. And in the bottom, it's 4x squared. Number 35. To add fractions, they have to have the same denominator. One denominator is x minus 1 and the other is x. So we need to figure out what is the least common denominator. To find the least common denominator, you create a product that contains all of the factors in the denominators. One factor is x, the other factor is x minus 1. This is what we want the common denominator to be. Now let's change our first fraction so it has that denominator. It's missing an x, and then also multiply the top by x. The second fraction has the x, but it's missing the x minus 1. And multiply the top by x minus 1. Now rewrite the adding problem. The first fraction is x over x times x minus 1. And the second fraction becomes x minus 1 over x times x minus 1. Now that the denominators are same, we add the numerators. X plus x is 2x, and there's also a minus 1. In the bottom, it's x times x minus 1. Now number 45. This is a subtracting fractions question, so you have to have the same denominators. I notice the denominators are polynomials that need to be factored. This polynomial here factors as d plus 1, d minus 1. So instead of using the d squared minus 1, we're going to think of that denominator as d plus 1 times d minus 1. Now in the other fraction, the denominator has a GCF of 2. So we can factor out a 2. Instead of using the denominator 2d plus 2, we'll use its factored form 2 times d plus 1. Now we can get our least common denominator. The second fraction contributes a 2. Both fractions have d plus 1. And the first fraction contributes d minus 1. That is the least common denominator. The first fraction has everything in the denominator except for the 2. So we need to times by 2. And in the top. In the second fraction, we have the 2 and we have the d plus 1, but we're missing the d minus 1. So multiply by that in the bottom and in the top. Now we're going to rewrite our subtraction problem where both fractions have the least common denominator. D plus 2 times 2 is 2d plus 4. And that's over the least common denominator. Now the second fraction. 3 times d minus 1 is 3d minus 3. And in the bottom, it is the least common denominator. Now that both fractions have the same denominator, we can subtract the numerators. 2d subtract 3d is negative 1d, or just negative d. And now the constants. 4 subtract negative 3 is a positive 7. In the bottom is our common denominator. This concludes the video.